Leg in a blue cast, I hopped across the street on crutches. 49 hours had passed since I fell down the stairs and saw the intruder in the basement. Or at least, saw his hands. Regardless, enough was enough. I needed a concrete plan and concrete answers to deal with this. At this rate, the intruder would reach my room in weeks, maybe even days. I still didn't even know what would happen if he got to me, but I sure as fuck didn't want to find out. Time was short. I pounded on the neighbor's door and something inside moved. Through frosted windows, down the hallway, the shadow of a door creaked open. Someone peered out, a blurry silhouette. I waved politely, and they stood there, watching me, motionless. And then they stepped back into the room and pulled the door shut. I raised my hand to knock again when the front door swung open. There stood P.T. Carver, dressed in blue jeans and a brown shirt, looking even more Clint Eastwood-like than before. "Brandon," he smiled warmly. I opened my mouth to respond, but I realized I didn't even know his name yet. Just the initials. "Paul's fine." He stepped back from the door and motioned me inside. "Paul." I propped forward onto my crutches and... Wait. He reached behind the door and produced a box of disposable light blue masks. "You don't mind, do you?" Put a mask on himself and handed another one to me. I put on the mask. "Getting too old to risk it, you know," said Paul, stepping back from the door and once again motioning me inside. As I stepped past him, his eyes dropped to the blue cast around my leg. "What happened there?" "Stairs." "Ouch." He shut the door. Despite the sunny day outside, it was dark in here. All the blinds were pulled shut and everything was cast in shadow, save for a couple low-energy desk lamps and thin beams of intruding sunlight. I looked around, my eyes adjusting. The interior of Paul's house contradicted my expectations, to put it mildly. It felt like an old Wall Street corner office. Fancy stuff. Gold brass light fixtures in the ceiling, varnished oak walls, with ornate patterns carving into the crowning. Expensive looking. Moody Renaissance paintings up on the walls. Never judge a house by its cover, I guess. There was no upstairs, only the first floor, a couple bedrooms, and a door that led to what I assumed was a basement. A long hallway led to the back of the house, and I noticed a room which someone had peered out from. The door was still shut. The air smelled like tobacco and vanilla. Not a bad smell, at least not to me. Tobacco scent always reminded me of my dad's house, back when I was a kid, and still somewhat happy. I kicked off my shoes and pressed my sock-covered feet against the floor. The carpet was out of place. Greenish-brown, scratchy, worn down to the plywood in some areas. "Please," Paul motioned me towards the living room. I shuffled deeper into the house. "Feel free to take a seat." Paul nodded towards a long green velvet couch. I slumped down. Immediate relief. Hobbling around on crutches was more tiring than it looked. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "I'm good, thanks." "You sure? Water?" "No, thanks." Paul sat down on a wooden stool across from me, a stool that creaked with antique strain. Unstable. Crossing his legs, he leaned against the wall, studying me like a therapist studying client. "So?" I took a deep breath and exhaled. Last night, I saw him." Paul's face remained neutral. He shifted his weight slightly. "Saw who?" "The intruder." I leaned forward in my seat. What I saw has no reasonable... hands. Barely human. I trailed off into silence. "You take a photo?" I shook my head. "Good. Keep it that way." "Why?" He studied me carefully before continuing. "You seen a doctor?" "No." He glanced down at the cast on my leg, then back up to me. I rolled my eyes. "Well, yeah." "You tell him about?" "No." His face filled with strange relief. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. "Do not tell anyone else about this, okay? Not even Mitch. You understand?" "Sure." Paul leaned back, reached into the chest pocket of his shirt and produced a cigarette. He pulled his mask down to his chin, lifting the smoke up to his mouth. He pinched it between thin lips, took out a pack of matches, and a thump reverberated from somewhere deep inside the house. He froze, raised an eyebrow. Silence. He shrugged, struck the match, and then another thump. Paul shook out the match and tossed it into an empty tin can set upon a yellow plastic crate to his left. He sighed, irritated. "Excuse me." He stepped up and marched deeper into the house. I watched as he rounded the corner and disappeared into the foyer hallway. More silence. Now, I was starting to wonder if coming over here was such a good idea to begin with. Things felt off. Sure, my initial meeting with Paul was surprising, to say the least. His long, drawn-out bear safety monologue was odd, but endearing, in a weird sort of way. But when Paul showed up at the diner, Mitch seemed truly disturbed, like he'd seen a ghost or something even worse. Either way, I just wanted answers, and hopefully Paul would give me that. Hopefully. Right then, the sound of a door clicked open in the foyer hallway. It clicked shut. The faintest hint of a smell wafted into the room. The recurring smell of gasoline and burned hair. So subtle, it might have been imagined. Around the corner, down the hallway, muffled voices. Arguing? I tilted my head and strained to listen, but... "Sorry about that," said Paul, suddenly stepping into the room. No worries." With oddly pin-straight posture, Paul sat down on the couch across from me, an old velvet couch with old-timey drawings of farms and ducks that reminded me of a sofa at my grandma's house. It's probably the exact couch you're imagining right now. The same couch I slept on after my dad's funeral. Only I didn't really sleep. I just lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, thinking. So that's it, huh? You stop existing, and now everybody gets together and eats coleslaw and leftover turkey, and that's it. Seems a little anticlimactic. You want answers, huh? Paul struck up another match. He lit up the cigarette and finally took a slow, satisfied drag. He exhaled. The smoke lingered around him for a moment, then slowly drifted back towards the dining room, passing through beams of derelict sunlight. "Why does Mitch think you're dead?" Paul nodded, expecting the question. Reaching over the side of the couch, he tapped the cigarette with his pointer finger. Small bits of glowing ash broke off and tumbled down into the tin can. "Back when Mitch and Evelyn, his sister, were kids, I had some pretty serious health issues. Still do, full disclosure. But I'm medicated now, and that helps." He lifted the cigarette to take another drag, but stopped short, remembering something. He lowered it. "After my parents passed away, I started to believe something was stalking me, toying with me." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Started with small things at first. Bumps in the night, food gone bad before the expiry date. Things too small to talk about, but too big to just, brush off." He met my eyes, then looked away and took another short drag. I thought back to the expired milk in my fridge, one of many unanswered questions still festering in the back of my mind, sporadically buzzing past my ear like a persistent mosquito, infuriating. Paul sighed. "I'm a rationalist at heart, so the possibility of something unnatural." He waved his hand like a magician. "That never crossed my thoughts." He paused again, glancing over at me, judging my reactions as he spoke. "Now bear with me, because all this leads to a point," he continued. "One night, back in 94, maybe 93, the kids and their mom were fast asleep. It was Thursday, so I went down to the basement for canned peaches and late night beer." He pointed down at the floor. The light was out, so I came back with a flashlight and trailed off into silence, his cold blue eyes still locked on the floor. This time, someone was down there, just standing there. Stood down the basement hallway with their back turned to me. I wanted to call out, yell at them, run upstairs, get my 9mm, but instead, I just froze, like roadkill in headlights. Paul looked directly at me. That's when it hit me. I realized that this intruder, over 7 feet tall by the way, he was halfway stuck into the concrete wall, like the mold was set around him and dried there. Paul shook his head like a chill went down his spine. The sight was so strange, I couldn't even think straight. He leaned forward and rubbed his forehead with the back of his thumb. A weird tick that suddenly stood out to me. Mitch did the same thing. And so did Howie. Why? Things got really bad after that. The more I tried to fight it, the worse it got. The more I tried to make sense of things. He trailed off into a moment of silence. Of course, nobody else saw him. They just saw a stack of cardboard boxes. He paused again, looking around the room. One night, cold, autumn night, I'd been dealing with this ever-encroaching nightmare for weeks at that point. I downed 2 bottles of cognac and brought my 9mm downstairs, marched straight up to him. He made a gun with his fingers and pointed at me, pressed the barrel between his dead eyes and pulled the trigger. He mimed the motion of gun kickback and limply dropped his hand back onto his thigh. Buddy didn't even flinch. Bullet went straight through him, ricocheted off the back corner and got me in the hand. He held up his left hand. The pinky finger was cut off short at the first knuckle. I hadn't even noticed that until now. How did I miss that? Paul shook his hand like it went numb and leaned back into his seat again. After that, Ollie threatened to leave, take the kids with her. He rubbed the side of his palm against his left forearm, ruminating. I'd leave myself too if I could. Then his eyes lit up, remembering. Let me show you something. Paul pushed up from the couch. He strolled towards the door I assumed led to the basement. I remained seated. After my last encounter with the intruder, I wasn't a big fan of stairs, or basement for that matter. You coming? After noticing my hesitation, Paul looked back at me the same way my dad used to, struggling to hide disappointment. Silent judgment. I cleared my throat, grabbed my crutches, and pushed to standing. Paul smiled a half smile, pulled his mask back up, and pulled a ring of keys out from his pocket. Humming to himself, he rifled through, unlatched a key, and turned the lock. No dice. He relatched the key and went back to rifling, still humming all the while. Meanwhile, I stood back about 10 feet, head turned, eyes locked on the mysterious room at the end of the hallway. The door was shut. You live alone? Yes. Well, yes and no. He unlatched another key and gave that one a try. No dice. An old friend lives in the room down the hall. I'm the caretaker, sort of. That's good of you. Yeah, well, I owe them one. I considered asking more, asking if they were a guest keeping the intruder at bay, but something told me to keep it to myself. Paul huffed, unlatching a third key from the ring, holding it up to his face. He studied it like a jeweler studies a suspect diamond. He brought it down to the lock, pushed it in, and turned. Finally, the door clicked open. Paul looked around, searching for words, the same word Howie did. Shaking his head, he tucked away the key and stepped down into the dark. He flicked the light on, cold fluorescent glow stammered to life, concrete walls and wooden steps smothered in layers of dust. Paul looked back over his shoulder. You good with stairs? He said, looking down at my cast-covered leg. I'll try. He nodded. Use the railing. Turning back, he stepped deeper into the basement. I hobbled over to the top of the stairs. The flight of steps seemed longer than expected, like it went down 1.5 stories instead of just one. Paul stood at the bottom, another door in front of him. Though maybe door wasn't quite the right word, more like a bunker hatch, metallic, and held shut with an arm-sized lever instead of a doorknob. I didn't want to go into the basement, but the weight of morbid curiosity compelled me yet again, every single time. Paul gripped his hands around the lever, braced himself against the wall and pulled. His wiry arms flexed and strained as the lever slowly moved towards him, gritting his teeth. Paul yanked harder and harder until finally the lever gave way, lurching backwards suddenly. The metallic door itself shifted downward with an echoing clang, and clouds of dust particles burst out from the edges. Paul wiped his forehead with the back of his arm, squat down, and grabbed the bottom of the door with both hands, hoisting upward. He pushed the door into a vertical swing. It pressed flat up against the ceiling. There was nothing but dark ahead, pitch dark. Paul crept forward, and silence followed. 5 long seconds ticked by until a light flicked on. More cold, stuttering glow. "You good?" Paul's voice echoed up the staircase. Yeah, I'm okay," I said, stepping forward. Going downstairs on crutches was even more tedious than expected. The whole precarious journey took about 3 minutes until, finally, I stepped into the basement. A long, narrow hallway led to a 2-way fork in the path. Dirt floors, plywood walls. I've got an engineering/construction background. Paul kept strolling forward, built his place from the ground up. He stood at the fork in the hallway and looked both ways, thinking. He looked left, he looked right, he looked left again. He shrugged. "Gotta be this way." He pushed forward. I followed. "This basement's bigger than you'd think," he said, rounding the corner. Another narrow hallway stretched about 20 feet until it reached another 2-way fork. Paul kept walking, and I kept following. "I put up these walls, tried to build a maze around him, slow him down." He chuckled, rounding another corner. "Then I put up the bunker hatch and..." He trailed off into silence, rounding yet another corner. "Why not build a bunker directly around the intruder?" I asked. Paul looked back at me and cracked a grim smile. "Tried that. And? Didn't work," he said, eyes filled with a dark story. I didn't push it any further. We entered a 10 by 10 foot room. Paul stepped into the middle and turned back to face me. "This, my friend, is the construction of a former madman." He looked around, taking it all in. "Only left me halfway into building it." He shook his head and spat at the ground. "I don't blame her." He looked directly at me. "Look, kid," he paused. "You want all this to go away? You want to stop having these encounters? Work on yourself." I blinked. "Are you kidding me?" Half shrugging, he continued. "I know how it sounds, but after Holly took the kids and left, it really kicked me into gear. I stopped drinking, got help, professional help, started taking meds, the right meds, and sure enough, all this went away. No more man in the basement, no more altered reality bullshit. I know it's the last thing you want to hear, but this thing, it's all in your head. Or at least, it's mostly in your head." "You don't think it's a little odd that my hallucinations matched yours?" Paul nodded understandingly. "What do you think set all this off?" I shook my head. "The note," Paul sighed. "The note my son, well-meaning though he was, left on your doorstep." I just wanted to leave now. I was tired. Everything was contradicting everything else. "You ever heard of a tulpa?" He reached forward and placed his hand onto my shoulder. I didn't respond. I just stood there, staring at him blankly, leaning forward on my crutches. "Tulpas," Paul continued, "are these things that don't exist until you believe they exist. The more you believe they exist, the more they exist. And the more they exist, the more they can fuck with you." If I wasn't so tired, I would have laughed. Okay. "Look, I'm not saying that's what this is, but it might be what it is." "Sure." Mitch. Bless him. He still thinks it's all real. Think it's got to me years back. Think it's controlling me now. Using me to trick others into worshipping it or something. He smiled sadly. "It's a different story every time." Paul shook his head. "All I can say is this. It's only as real as you let it be. And the only way to stop it is to figure out what's wrong with your life and fix that." Something upstairs moved. 3 quick, staggering footsteps. Paul glanced up at the ceiling and then back down to me. "Ignore the intruder and follow the rules until you've fixed your life, or until you stop believing it. Then you take that coat rack out past city limits and you douse it in gasoline and you burn it. Okay?" "Okay," I said non-committally. Finally, he pulled his hand off my shoulder. "You need help with anything? I'm always here. You got booze problems, money problems, life problems, anything, he said, his eyes filled with sincerity. This thing, it really messes with your head. Makes it hard to know who you can trust, you know? Sometimes it feels like it's almost jumping in and out of people, you know? Controlling them. But it's all in your head. His tone was shifting now, almost sounding excited. Part of me was wondering if the intruder was controlling him right now, deriving twisted pleasure out of messing with me. I shook off the thought and another thump upstairs. This time, Paul acted like he didn't hear it. I should go, I said, stepping backward. Sure, kid, said Paul, again, almost talking to me like I was his son. I turned around, and as fast as I could without tripping, I crutched my way out of the basement maze, up the stairs, and out the front door. Stepping out of Paul's house, I took a deep breath of fresh air. It felt like getting rescued from drowning. I exhaled relief. At this point, I didn't trust Paul or Mitch, or even Howie for that matter. Nothing was stable, and everything was getting worse. I hobbled back across the street and my phone buzzed alive. I stopped in the middle of the road, pulled it out, and flicked on the screen, squinting. I held it up to my face. 27 missed calls. Mitch Carver. Of course.